You have questions? The Bible has answers. This program, overseen by the Phillips St Church of Christ, is dedicated to answering your questions with God's Word. Please join us for the period of study as we seek to give a Bible answer. And now, here is your moderator.
Hello everyone, welcome to a Bible Answer. We're glad you're watching today. We have 3 gospel preachers with us. They're doing a fantastic job all this month in answering your questions. We'll have them introduce themselves to you at this time.
I'm Alan Webster. I've been preaching the gospel for 37 years.
Well, I'm Tony Lawrence, the preacher for the Church of Christ at Bobby Branch in McMinnville, Tennessee.
I'm Jonathan Burns, and I preach at the East Hill Church of Christ in Pulaski, Tennessee.
So this month is the first time that these 3 friends of mine have been able to be with us on a Bible Answer. They've come from some distance to be with us. I really appreciate them taking the time out of their schedules and making the effort and making the study to be with us today to answer your questions. Today is one of the milestone programs in the history of a Bible Answer. This is program 900. 900. I was told by Secretary Janice Diggs at Phillips St that we've had several calls recently dealing with the subject of grief. And I can see why that would be the case since we've just gone through this pandemic. But she suggested that we might have a special program on the subject. I thought that was a good idea. And this special program will be in honor of Janice Diggs, the Phillips St Secretary, our co-worker, and in memory of her husband, Bobby Diggs, Phillips St elder, in honor of Edgar Shults, former Phillips St elder, and in memory of his wife, Peggy Shults. Brethren Diggs and Shults, along with Gerald Swims, were elders at Phillips St when this program began, and without them and their encouragement and their leadership, a Bible Answer could not have been a force for good and for the gospel for all these years. And so today, a special program on the subject of grief. Brother Webster, here is your first question today. How can grief affect you, Brother Webster?
This program is a Bible Answer, so we'll go to John 11 to see an example of grief in the New Testament. There's a man who was close to Jesus. His name was Lazarus. He had 2 sisters, Mary and Martha. Lazarus got sick. His sisters sent for Jesus, who was at a different location, and asking him to come because they knew that Jesus could heal the sick. Jesus did not arrive until Lazarus had died. And he arrived at the house of mourning because there was sadness in the house because one was not there that was loved. And this text says in 3 different verses that Jesus loved Lazarus. It says in the 2nd verse, "He whom thou lovest is sick." And then it says again in verse 4 that Jesus loved him. And then when Jesus wept near the end of the chapter, verse 35, 36, those who saw Jesus weeping said, "Behold how he loved him." So here's a man whom Jesus, the Bible specifically says Jesus loved. It's also obvious that his sisters loved him. It's obvious that his community thought highly of him because they assembled at this house to comfort those who were in mourning. Now we can see that there are 5 results from the death of Lazarus in this home. First, there was interruption of their normal activities or routine because it says that the community came to comfort them in their grief, verse 19 of chapter 11. So all these people had other things to do. No doubt Mary and Martha had other plans for this week, but because their brother has died, everything has been interrupted, and grief affects us in that way. We're no longer in our normal routines of life. We have to deal with things that we would not wish to deal with, but because it's a part of families, it's a part of communities, we must deal with them. We also see that these sisters are weeping, so another result of grief is sadness and pain. You see that Mary is weeping, and those that are there to comfort her also weeping. Jesus wept, the shortest verse in the English New Testament, John 11:35. So there's a lot of weeping going on. There's a lot of pain. So they are So the third one then would be you also have second guessing in this chapter, because it says that when Martha meets Jesus, she says to him, "If thou hadst been here, my brother hadn't died." In other words, she's going through this. Well, if things had worked out differently, this would have never happened. And she had hoped Jesus would get there while he was still alive and Jesus could heal him, but Jesus did not arrive. So she's second guessing how things have worked out. We also see in this chapter that there is a mild accusation perhaps against Jesus here. Sometimes in our grief we act out against others, or we blame others because we're in such pain. And she says, "If thou hadst been here, my brother had not died." That seems to be saying, Jesus, if you had hurried up, if you had gotten here, then we wouldn't be going through this today. So there seems to be an accusation in that text. And then we see the fifth thing, that it says that Jesus groaned and was troubled. And grief brings trouble into our lives. Sometimes there are physical results. We may not be able to sleep as we normally would. We may not feel like eating, have no appetite. We may not have any energy for doing the things that we normally would do. And we may not feel like interacting with others. So grief can have some very serious consequences in our lives, but thankfully, death hurts, but Jesus helps. And we see in this chapter that Jesus brought Lazarus back to his family. And though that will not happen in our case, certainly we can go to be with our Christian loved ones. And so Jesus offers hope even at the grave. 1 Thessalonians 4, 13 through 18. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. And now to Brother Lawrence. What can we learn from rituals of grieving in the Bible? Brother Lawrence.
Well, rituals are things that we do on specific occasions or at specific times. We may have a ritual at our bedtime where we brush our teeth and do things such as that. But generally when we have times of grief, there are rituals that we will go through, and there are all different types of grief as well. This program, it seems to focus upon those who pass from this life, but we know there are people who suffer grief because they've gone through times of sickness, and sometimes that sickness is life-threatening. Others have experienced various kinds of loss in their life. Maybe they've lost a job, or maybe they've even lost a dear friend who's moved away. And there are even other kinds of loss as well. Maybe a spouse has had their mate to abandon them, and they are suffering all kinds of sorrow and sadness and grief. When we look at the Bible, we can see several instances of it. I'm not going to exhaust this by any means, but let me point you to, first of all, what occurred in the book of Job. And in Job chapter 2 and verse 11, we see, first of all, that friends rally around friends when there are times of grief. In Job chapter 2, verse 11, we read, "Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came every one from his place, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite, for they had made an appointment to come together to mourn with him and to comfort him." We see the closeness that takes place when people see someone going through a time of grief, whatever kind of grief it is, to rally around them. What I find interesting is in Job 42 and verse 11, we read there, "Then there came unto him all his brethren, all his sisters, and all they that had been his acquaintance before, and did eat bread with him in his house, and they bemoaned him and comforted him over all the evil that the Lord brought upon him. Every man also gave him a piece of money, and every one an earring of gold." You see, in those 2 instances, both during and after, there was the time of a ritual of helping someone through that difficult time of grief in their life. And I would emphasize that there's a lot for us to learn in that ritual today, that many times when we have those who pass from this life, we go and we express our sympathy while they are enduring that grief. But we need to also remember that afterward, they still need words of encouragement. They still need other things. A second area where I would suggest that we see a ritual of a person suffering grief is in the area of prayer. If you'll remember David, when his child that was conceived with Bathsheba was sick, near death, David prayed and prayed fervently for that child's life. You can go to 2 Kings chapter 20 and you can see the life of King Hezekiah and how Hezekiah was so fearful of the death that was impending, and so he prayed to the Lord fervently that he would be delivered from that, and was. In Matthew 26 and verse 38, it says that Jesus said to James and John and Peter, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even unto death. Tarry ye here and watch with me." The Lord prayed, and the Lord wanted to be surrounded by those who were the closest to Him. But I would suggest there's a third area where we can offer help as a part of a ritual during a time of grief, and that is showing an importance to the memory of their life. If you'll remember in Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 7, Solomon said, "The memory of the righteous is blessed." When we recall to our minds those good people who we have known and we've worked with and we've loved and we've appreciated, when we express our memories, we go through them, we reminisce. Many times as we're conducting eulogies, which are literally good words at funerals, we are expressing the memory of that person's life and just simply rehearsing all the good that they have done. When Luke recorded the raising of Tabitha, particularly at her service in Acts chapter 9, we read in verse 39 that those who were there weeping were showing the coats and the garments that Dorcas had made while she was with them. We need to remember people and the good that they have done and reflect upon that, and that does assist us as we go through these difficult times of grief. And then, as Brother Allen had mentioned, I think carefully about what occurred when the people gathered at Lazarus' tomb, and how that the Lord was deeply troubled and groaned in his spirit, and the Lord expressed grief and sorrow and even tears as he saw the passing of his dear friend. But the Lord also knew that he would be raised from the dead. That to me is the greatest comfort that we can have in our grief and in our times of sorrow. Thank you for that good question.
Thank you. We've reached the halfway point of our program today. We want to offer to you a free tract. Our tract today is special just for today, Advice to the Grieving. And this is a tract that Brother Webster wrote, Advice to the Grieving. You can also have our free at-lesson Bible correspondence course, or send us your question by contacting us at Phillips St Church of Christ, 912 Phillips Street, Dyersburg, Tennessee, 38024. And waiting for that to pop up. There we go. And then we have our web address at www.abibleanswertv.org, our email address of bibleanswered@earthlink.net, and our toll-free number 1-800-436-0463. Back to our questions now to Brother Burns. How can trusting in the Lord aid us in the grief process? Brother Burns.
There is one great reality that I think we all need to agree upon. We cannot do it alone. Grief takes on many different forms, and as we live, both as young and as older, we will experience grief in a variety of different forms. But you cannot do it alone. You need God. You need your family, and you need your spiritual family. I believe grief shows us God's plan and God's wisdom. God designed the family unit to be a unit that lives, that helps, that aids. God designed the marriage unit to be something that provides a help to one another. And God designed and planned the church so that we would have a system, a group of people, a family of which we can support each other. We learn inside of Scripture about grief. We learn in Psalm 147:3 that God is the one that binds up the wounds. He's the one that takes care of us, and He helps us in our sufferings. We also learn as you look toward the New Testament that we're not the only ones who have ever suffered. We also see that in the Old Testament. Beginning in the very beginning, you see Adam and Eve who suffered grief there in the garden and thereafter. You see Adam and Eve in their first children who suffered grief. And we see already forms of grief that can exist in this life and tragedy that truly can take place. But you also see in the New Testament in passages like Matthew 26, verse 44, where Jesus was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and in that great time of grief, He prayed a prayer. He prayed a second prayer. He prayed a third prayer. And Matthew 26, verse 44 says a third time, saying the same words. You see, the Bible has a lot to say about grief. And therefore, we begin to understand something about God and ourselves in how we trust God. Matter of fact, in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 through 13, and explicitly as you go through down to verse 14, you read these words, "Wherefore, my dearly beloved, flee from idolatry." If you'll look at verses 1 through 13, you will see that there are a variety of things that have happened to people. And inside of all the things of life, it is up to you and me to trust in God. Whether it be things of spiritual nature, we need to trust God. Or whether it be in times of tragedy or grief or other things that may be unconventional to our minds, we need to be people who trust God. I want to share with us 5 different ways we can trust God during times of grieving and find in our lives how that can aid us in this life. What we can do, number 1, if we are grieving in this life is we can use what God has provided for us. God has planned and designed the church. And therefore in the church He has placed elders to be the shepherds of our souls. You and I, we can trust God more during grieving when we lean upon those that God has put into our lives, such as elders. The wisdom that can come from God's plan in designing elders and designing a place for us to live and to have assistance. You and I can talk to our elders during times of grief, and thus we can trust God in the grieving process. Number 2, what we can do in this life to trust God in this grieving process, no matter what it may be, we can depend on His Word more. We can listen to it in programs such as this that are designed to provide a Bible answer. We can go to sermons and Bible classes and Bible articles and so many other things that we are privileged to have in the life that we live, the age of technology, to study more about God and to truly see we're not the only people that have gone through grief. We can trust His Word more. We can be people who pray more. That's a great aid in grief, as has been mentioned already in the program today. We can individually study the Bible more. That will help us trust God in the grieving process. You see, what we put into our lives of necessity is going to come out. And then number 5, we can trust our families. That will aid us in this process. And in doing so, we rely on our physical families, but also the church, our spiritual family. And when we trust God more, we will lean upon the things that God has given for us to strengthen us, to encourage us, and that will help us trust God more in the grieving process. And we might say that grieving process is sometimes called life. What a great question.
Thank you. Now to Brother Webster. In view of Job's 3 friends who were miserable comforters, please discuss what you should not say and do to someone who is grieving. Brother Webster.
Probably most of us are uncomfortable when we are around death. People do not like to talk about death. Many people do not even plan a will for how their possessions will be distributed after they die because they don't want to deal with it. And often when someone in our circle, be a family member or a friend, dies, we know that we need to comfort them. We know that we should do something, but often we do not know what to do. And we may just parrot what we have heard others say, or we may not give a good answer to what, we may not have good advice to give them. So let's suggest just a few things very quickly that we should avoid saying in a funeral home or to someone who's grieving. Number 1, don't say, don't cry, don't be sad. That's an unrealistic request to make of someone. It probably has more to do with making us feel better than making them feel better, because we are not comfortable around others who are crying. We want to fix it. We want them to be happy. But it's unrealistic to tell someone not to be sad when they've lost a loved one, when they're suffering grief. The second thing that we should not say is, I'm sure there's a purpose in it. I'm sure that God had some reason for this to happen. You know, that seems to come out of a religious teaching called Calvinism, that God is responsible, that He predestines or foreordains everything that happens in the world, but the Bible does not teach that. The Bible teaches, for instance, when Jesus gave the parable of the Good Samaritan, He said, by chance a priest passed by that way. It wasn't that God intended for that to happen, it just happened that way. You also see it in Jesus' teaching in Luke 13 when Tower of Siloam fell on 18 individuals, and Jesus says, suppose ye that these are more wicked than any others in that city, and his question is rhetorical. The answer is no, they were just at the wrong place at the wrong time. So we do not have to find purpose in the loss of a loved one, certainly not to blame God that He had a purpose in this. Now that does not mean that God cannot bring good out of any bad situation that happens, Romans 8:28. He can bring good into our lives even with the bad things that happen. And a third thing we should never say, and I believe this is the worst one to say to someone, is to say, Jesus must have needed her more than you did. Well, I know people mean well when they say something like that. They mean to imply that the loved one has gone to be with Jesus, and sure, that's comforting, of course, in the case of a Christian, but it also implies to the person that Jesus is responsible for the pain that they're suffering, that Jesus took this person away. The Bible does not teach that death in those terms. In fact, 1 Corinthians 15:26 says the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. Death is an enemy. Jesus came to the earth to destroy that enemy, but why is death in the world? Because of sin. Who introduced sin in the world? Man and the devil. So these are not responsibilities of God, but God is giving us the means to overcome them. So those are three quick suggestions of things not to say to someone who's grieving.
Thank you. And now to Brother Lawrence. How can we help others deal with grief? Brother Lawrence.
That's something that I suppose each of us want to be able to do as best we possibly can. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, we're told, blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the God of comfort. But verse 4 goes on to say that we may be able to comfort them who are in any trouble with the comfort wherewith we ourselves are comforted of God. So we read there that we were comforted to be comforters. That is, we are to help, to assist, to try to help people who are going through difficult times in their life. And for me, myself, I have some suggestions that I believe can be practical in trying to help people during this difficult time. I reflect back on many years ago, about 1983, when my father passed at 52 years of age. It was a very shocking event, but there were several things that were done at that time which I think really helped. Number one was the fact that people were just there, not necessarily having to say anything, not necessarily having to offer any specific words. My best friend, who's also now a gospel preacher, came a number of miles and just simply sat there, didn't say anything. I cannot tell you how much that meant to me as a person. And for you to be present during people's times of grief, I think can be of great help. But second of all is to acknowledge their sadness, to acknowledge what they are going through. In Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 10, Solomon wrote, "The heart knows its own bitterness, and a stranger does not intermeddle with joy." That means that I have my own sadness. I know how deep it is. When Paul would write 1 Corinthians chapter 2, he would say, "Who knows the things of a man except the spirit of the man which is in him?" We should look at people and realize that they have grief inside of them internally, and to make sure that we try to recognize that grief and to appreciate it and respond appropriately to it. And in doing so, I would suggest that we express either empathy or sympathy. Empathy is when we express our concern, we express our sorrow, our consolation, and yet we have not gone through that. On the other hand, there are times when we have gone through the same sort of difficulties ourselves. And the Bible tells us about Jesus in Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15, who was tempted as all points as we are, yet without sin. And it says that we do not have a high priest who cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities or our difficulties. But number 3 is genuinely offer help during that period of time. I've had many people come and say, "Can we help you? What is there we can do?" May I suggest to go one step further than that? Be proactive. If you drive by your neighbor's house who's just had surgery and you see his lawn needs to be mowed, don't go to his house and say, I see your lawn is growing a little large. Do you need somebody to take care of it for you? Go and do that. Make sure that you're proactive and do something without being asked, without having someone to say, well, you really need to do that. And then number 4, when there are expressions of sympathy, whether it is the purchase of flowers, the giving of a memorial gift, think about the person to whom you are providing this encouragement in their time of grief. Give something that would help them in that time of memory. Perhaps if it's a gospel preacher, give money to help support the preaching and the teaching of the gospel in a mission area. Maybe help the training of young men to be gospel preachers. Put some thought in what you're doing. Thank you for that really good question.
Thank you for all these great answers. I just want to say, don't be afraid to grieve. Be willing to express your emotions. You know, they wept for Moses 30 days when he died, according to Deuteronomy 34 and verse 8. Surround yourself with family and friends as Mary and Martha did when Lazarus died in John 11. Trust in the Lord, as they've said. I like Psalm 18 and verse 2. The Lord is my rock and my fortress, my deliverer, my God, my strength, in whom I will trust. It's a whole lot better to trust God than blame Him, isn't it? Unfortunately, a lot of people do the latter. And you know, if they were faithful to the Lord, then rejoice in the promise of heaven with them. Brother Tom Holland wrote, the burdens of the day will be lighter when we look through confident eyes to the hope of tomorrow. Thanks, friends, for watching A Bible Answer. Remember, for all your questions, there's a Bible answer.
We would love to hear from you, our viewers. If you have questions for A Bible Answer, or if you'd like any of the material offered on this program, please contact us at the address on the screen. We appreciate all of our supporters, and we encourage you to worship with a faithful Church of Christ in your area.